Welcome to 78.4, the podcast that helps you leave a godly legacy for future generations by showing you incredible things God has done in the lives of men and women around the world. If he can do those things in these people's lives, imagine what he can do in yours. I'm Bob.
And I'm Matt. So last week, Bob, we talked about the power of love.
Yep.
And loving the hard to love. But what do we do when we are confronted with pure hate? Especially the kind that hates based on the color of your skin, your race, your culture. I can't think of a more hateful, horrible human action than racism. And even though we've come a long way in America, it was an original sin in our country, and sadly, by some, racism still exists today. Mm-hmm. Like a cockroach. It won't die easy, and it's just as ugly. So today we're going to talk about the cockroach of our society, racism. How do we, as Christians, deal with racism when we see it today? And it's gotten so political. It's so hard to discuss nowadays. There's going to be some, I think, that will hear us right now and say, aren't these two white men?
Shouldn't get any whiter.
Should they be talking about this? Maybe they shouldn't. But we submit to you, if we're going to do anything about racism as a nation, a world, then everyone needs to talk about it, especially Christians. Where God said that he so loved the world, that's everyone, by the way, that he offers his love, his salvation, his restoration to all people without regard to race. And in fact, made every race and made us all in his image. We are all his children. I remember as a kid, Bob, I have a birthmark. I have a birthmark on my left ankle, and it's very dark. And I remember when I first was hearing about racism, I was 6, 7 years old, I remember looking at the birthmark and thinking, what if all of me was that color? Would I be any less than I am now? And I came to the conclusion at 6 or 7, of course not. And even though that's a simple-minded, childlike rendition of the ridiculousness of racism, it's also kind of not. It is that simple that just because you're a different race, skin color, culture, that is the most horrible, baseless reason to hate someone or think less of someone. And it's so incredibly important for all of us to stand tall and loud against racism in all its forms when we see it, and advocate for the voices of those who have and still do deal with racism in a sinful world, which is why today we'll hear the voices of 4 people who have lived it, who have felt and confronted racism in their own lives, who will hopefully help shine a light and path for us to better deal with racism whenever we see it around us.
For our first story today, we're going to do something a little out of the ordinary. Mm-hmm. When we tell our stories, being truthful and accurate is critically important to us.
Right.
That's one of the reasons why we have people telling their own stories instead of us retelling them.
Right.
We want everything to be accurate and authentic. But this time, it's got to be different. The story we're going to hear is 100% true. But the person you'll hear is not the person whose story we're telling. Several years ago, a friend of mine named Al Aki asked me if I would help him tell the story of his Uncle George. George Aki was the first continental-born Japanese American chaplain to serve in World War II. That's a huge deal, by the way. Now, it took a few years, but we came up with a one-man play that Al, who is an actor, performed for George at his 100th birthday. George ended up living to be 103. Now, he passed away in 2018, which was a few years before we even started this podcast. We wanted to tell his story, but obviously he couldn't tell it. So everything you're going to hear was taken from George's journals and his other writings.
So everything we hear are going to be his words.
I rewrote them to be more, like you talk as opposed to you write.
Right.
But this is
But they're all his sentiments.
It's all his
Exactly.
sentiments. I didn't change any facts or anything like that. So the voice you'll hear is Al's, and he's playing his uncle.
So let's set this up for you. George Aki was born in California, raised in the Fresno area. But on the day the United States was forced into World War II, none of that seemed to matter anymore.
I was just an American. I was born here, attended school here, went to church here, but none of that made a difference. When the war broke out, FDR issued Executive Order 9066, and just like that, we were fugitives in our own land. They herded us like cattle into Greyhound buses with windows covered with brown butcher paper. What were they afraid we'd see? We knew where we were. It was our home. I'll never forget that sight. Big barbed wire fences and armed guards. Armed guards. Misaki and I held hands when the bus entered the gates. We were in Tanforan Racetrack in San Bruno. A horse track, for crying out loud. Seabiscuit ran there, and they turned it into a detainment camp. They assigned us to a filthy horse stall with a metal cot. Misaki and I put our suitcases on the dirt floor, cried. There was an empty bag on the cot. We had to take it to the infield and fill it with hay from a big pile. That was our mattress. The fleas and the horseflies were horrible. Whenever it rained, all that dried horse manure and urine just started to reek. They separated the men from the women for medical inspections, lined us up, and it was all so degrading. I wrote in my diary that day, George Aki died May 6, 1942. The government put all this together so quick it was all balled up. 7,000 people were held there, and you know how many latrines we had? 24. 24 latrines for 7,000 people. How could they do that to us? The stench was overpowering, and you had no privacy. But you know what made me the maddest of all? They arrested us. Well, they won't call it that, but that's what it was. They arrested us just a few days before I was to graduate. I'd worked so hard, studied for so long, and now it was all taken away from me. No graduation, no ordination, no hope. Instead of walking across the stage to accept my diploma, I was standing in a line 15 deep waiting for my turn to relieve myself. I'm not the hating kind, but I hated white people then. I hated America. It wasn't my home anymore. And God, well, I wasn't very happy with him either. Hate's a strong word, maybe too strong. And not every white person was mean to us. Not by a long shot. A couple of days after we got there, I was walking around the camp and I spot this guy, a guard outside the fence. Doggone, he looks familiar. So I walked closer to get a better look. I know him. That's Ward Stevenson from Pacific. Hey, Ward, George Aki from the School of Religion. How have you been? Me? Well, I'm here. Missed my graduation. But I'm married now. Yeah, that's right. Misaki. Yeah, Misaki Aki. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, not exactly how I would have liked to begin married life, but God has his plans. Well, we both better keep moving. I don't want to get you in trouble for talking to me. But you know what Ward did? He went to the Pacific Seminary and got my diploma and brought it to me. The Apostle Paul said that in Christ, There's no Jew or Greek, male or female, free man or slave, and now, according to Ward, there's no Japanese or white either. And then Robert Inglis and some other pastors from the Bay Area came to the camp to hold a special ordination for me. Oh, you better believe that took some doing. But he persevered, knowing it might cost him dearly. He said, "As this is no day and time for ordinary service in the Spirit of Christ, so is this ordination no ordinary event. No ordinary time, no ordinary service. That was my calling." Pretty soon I'm a chaplain to the internees. It was still a prison, but we all tried to make the best of it. We really cleaned up the place. I also helped teach. There were 1,000 kids total between the junior and senior high school. And one summer day, the student officers organized a school assembly in the grandstands where folks used to watch the horse races. It started off like any school assembly with a salute to the flag. But what happened next? Words can't really describe it. I mean, here we were, discouraged, displaced, detained, our allegiance in question, surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards, and despite all that, all the students, every last one of them, stood up to sing, "God Bless America." After the last note, no one spoke, not a sound. Even the guards had tears in their eyes. I looked up into that sea of young, innocent, impressionable faces who had lost so much, and yet they still loved their country. We were transferred to the Jerome Internment Center in Arkansas. Conditions there weren't much better. It was unbearably humid, rained all the time, lots of mud and mosquitoes. The one bright spot was that we were expecting our first child. Misaki wanted to make a nice place for the baby, but that was impossible. I was more concerned about the infirmary, that it was understaffed, undersupplied. Instead of cribs, newborns were placed in cardboard boxes. When the day came, they took Misaki inside the infirmary where, I waited outside. After what seemed like an eternity, a nurse comes out. "Mr. Aki," she says, "your wife is all right." "What about the baby? Is it a boy or a girl?" "It was a little girl. She was stillborn." What do you mean?" "Mr. Aki, I'm sorry, but your daughter is dead." "No, that can't be it. We're going to have a baby. I'm going to be a father. Get out of my way. I want to see my wife." Once I finally got myself calmed down, I was allowed in to see Misaki. There she is in the bed, holding our little girl, rocking her back and forth as tears run down onto our little Grace's lifeless head. That's what we named her, Grace. I stood by in a long silence. Misaki finally places Grace's limp body in my arms. "Grace, my beautiful girl, my baby girl. Do you know your daddy loves you very, very much?" The nurse finally came in and took Grace away from us. A day or so later, a soldier came to us, handed me a cardboard box. Scrawled across the top of it were the words, "Jap baby." It was at that point that I finally exploded inside. Jap baby? Those people took away our property, forced us out of our homes, made us live in the squalor. They treated us like criminals, humiliated my wife, and now they treat my daughter like a piece of garbage? I was broken beyond words. I said, Lord, attend unto my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are stronger than I. Bring my soul out of prison, that I may praise thy name. The righteous shall compass me about, for thou shalt deal bountifully with me. One day, some Army recruiters came to the camp looking for enlistments in the 442nd, an entire regiment made up of Japanese Americans. Anyone who signed up faced a lot of resentment from everyone in the camp, regardless of their reasons. Traitor, they called me. Someone asked, what play pretties did they give you to sell out your own people? You're not one of us. You're just a banana. Yeah, the insults hurt, but I knew enlisting was the right thing to do. As bad as it was for us in the camp, it was sure to be much worse in combat. God called me to stand beside the men of the 442nd, to pray for them and with them, and comfort them as they lie wounded or dying. No ordinary time, no ordinary service.
Now, just for time, we're going to skip one section that was really important.
Right.
And that is when George went to his temporary assignment in Alabama, he found all kinds of racism in the town. None of the hotels wanted to rent rooms to Japanese American people. So
The ones that are going to go fight for them.
right, well, it's the moms, the wives that are coming to say goodbye, maybe for the last time. And the 442nd is one of I think it's the most highly decorated unit in World War II, at least in the European theater. And many, many of these men died. So this was the last opportunity. Their loved ones had to say goodbye to them, and people would not rent hotel rooms to them.
Right, their prejudice was so bad that even seeing that, it couldn't get past their heads.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And George ended up fighting against that and getting a hotel to rent them rooms. So we're going to pick up the story at Shelby, where George ended up fighting a battle he didn't expect to fight.
In my naivete, I thought at least the chaplains would be respected for their contributions. Not so. The CO of the 171st, I'll call him Major Wyatt because I don't want to embarrass his family. Well, he was the worst offender. Then he was promoted to lieutenant colonel, and life became unbearable. The promotion made him a dictator with unbounded power, ruthless and cruel, and the men suffered greatly. One of our men died on the grenade grounds. I went to the medical officer to make arrangements for Private Oda's body to be brought down for his funeral. Wyatt was there to overrule the medical officer. He says, why don't you just get a small cardboard box, paint the remains of Private Oda on it, stick it in the back of the chapel, and then he laughs and walks away. I'd had enough. So I sent a letter to the Chief of Army Chaplains and laid out my case against our CO. My letter could be construed as insubordination or breaking the chain of command. It's very serious charge, especially during a war. But when I got back to Shelby, Wyatt was shipping out with the directive never to command troops again. That was a battle worth fighting. Finally, I got my orders and shipped out to Italy to join the 442nd. These men, these heroes, had everything taken away from them, and still they served. They gave their lives to protect the very people who treated them like animals and stripped them of their rights, their dignity. Working in the ruins of Italy, the Holy Spirit reminded me of 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, about how the sorrow we experience equips us to comfort others who come to experience the same pain. Jesus, you've been training me all along. No ordinary time. It didn't end with the war. All the pain and sorrow I experienced was so I could be everything you need me to be for others everywhere. I learned a great lesson from the war. The men of the 442nd didn't just buy the nation's freedom with their blood. They bought the nation's respect. From then on, they were heroes. In honor of them and in honor of my God, I spent the rest of my life protecting all Americans, not just Japanese Americans. And when a bigot acted out, I pointed to the blood of Christ that was shed for all men and women. And I pointed to the blood of the 442nd to show him his bigotry had no more place in this country. So that's my life. No ordinary time, no ordinary service.
One thing that impressed me so much about George as I read his writings was the balanced approach he had once he returned from the war. Now, in our show notes for today's episode, I'm going to include a link to a soundbite from George, the real guy, not his nephew Al, although Al's a great guy, but this is
cool.
This is the real George Aki, where he talks about the people who stood by him when he and other Japanese Americans were being so mistreated. When he saw that so many had fought for him while he was in the internment camp, he realized the U.S. wasn't completely evil and that it was still his home. You know, another thing, as I was reading his journals and all,
Right.
I realized how important it is for me to continue the spirit of those friends of George. And that's true for all of us as followers of Jesus. When we see injustice being done, and when we see someone is being mistreated, we need to stand up for them and with them.
Yeah, I too, Bob, love how God empowered George in the face of hate to somehow find forgiveness, to see the good, the hope, and all that fog and darkness of the time, the fear that turned into hate, that he turned into fighting with love for the things he believed in, freedom and the loving forgiveness of God. But surely, Bob, that wouldn't happen today,
Of course not.
I say, rolling my eyes.
Yeah.
We like to think this only happens deep in the past, but these examples don't need to go far back at all. I mean, my parents' generation grew up where if you were black, you couldn't share the same water fountain. You sat in the back of the bus. You couldn't enter the same bathrooms or restaurants as white people. That's one generation away from me. My mom said that she lived in Chicago back in the 60s,
Okay.
and there were regular race riots at her high school there. And of course, much worse treatment happened than that then. And so for me, I think it's important we remember, and me, as a white guy who wasn't part of that, to try to put myself in the shoes of those who did. Would I be able to trust the majority culture as easily if my parents had to live through that, if I lived through that? Would you? We need to be patient with each other and building trust and forgiveness, even for things we weren't part of, because we're still living in the aftermath of that. We're always this side of heaven dealing with the aftermath of sin, the sins of our fathers, of our nations, let alone the sins of today. And it's our job as Christians to acknowledge those sins and find a path to redemption. Which leads us to our next guests, Dirk and Lorna Johnson. They're an interracial couple, Dirk a white man and Lorna a black woman. And it's crazy, but interracial marriage was illegal in some places all the way in the United States up until 1967 with Loving v. Virginia. And though, thank God, things are definitely better now, the vast majority not just accepting but encouraging of interracial relationships, Dirk and Lorna learned a hard lesson that some people, even a ministry partner they had, still held deeply rooted racism that was about to spill out right in front of them. So here's their story on that day.
We got married in June 1979, which it was just beginning to become a little bit more common dealing with society because of being an interracial couple. And there was one experience that we had that kind of stands out amongst the few that there have been over the years. I took her to southwestern Minnesota in a rural area that had a retired farm couple that had been supporting my ministry, and I just wanted to introduce her to him. I thought she would enjoy the couple. knocked on the door of the family. They knew we were coming, and so she was very gracious and kind. Come on in, find a seat. He, on the other hand, wasn't even there to greet us, but he was around the corner, and he heard that we were there, and he starts to ask us questions. Well, how many kids are in your family?
I'm an only child. I thought all darkies came from big families.
So he says, the darky, which I thought, right away, I thought, okay, now did I just hear him right? Did he just say darky? And so then he asked her another question. What part of Africa are you from?
And I said, I was born here in the United States.
Yeah, so she said she's from San Diego, and she went
I thought all darkies were from Africa.
So how he referred to Lorna was darky this, darky that. And so I'm sitting there, this kind of caught me off guard.
He got caught off guard. Meanwhile, I'm a volcano, and the lava is really stirring at this point in me. Just to kind of give you a description, I was real quiet, but the lava was about to explode. During that era, such a derogatory term to have never met me, and it just felt like there was like taking a bow and arrow and going, letting go. Darky this, darky that, it was an arrow going in me. And not understanding, why are you attacking me? And just asking the Lord, give me understanding.
And I just okay, Lord. And I shot a quick arrow prayer to the Lord. It's like, what do I do here? What do I say? How do I react and respond to this situation? Believe it or not, God answered. The thought came to me in terms of how I could connect what he was saying to the gospel, to talk about a relationship with God through Christ. And I said, one of the things that we've recently begun doing is speaking related to our interracial relationships, right? And do they work? In how we address this and talk about it, I use a story, I use an example. And I talk about it would be like if you go into an art gallery. And when you go into this art gallery, you will see pictures that are all over the walls. They're everywhere. And you go in, you're critiquing the paintings, right? You're making comments about the painting. Why is this one painting better than this painting? But here's at a deeper level, because when you stop and think about it, are you really critiquing the painting? Well, in one way you are, but there's another thing that's even deeper, and that is you're critiquing the artist who drew the painting. And God has created individuals of all cultures, of all ethnicities, of all backgrounds and all kinds. When we begin to pigeonhole, and we begin to look down and make generalizations and judgments about people because they may be different than us, we're actually making a judgment against the Creator himself. Well, after I shared that, there wasn't much response.
In relationship to calling me darky.
Right. To the comments that she had made, and his wife was obviously very bothered by all of what he was saying. It was very obvious.
So we moved into the little dining area, and she provided sandwiches for us. And I can't even remember what we were talking about even at that time. But all of a sudden, he began to just kind of weep. And to this day, we don't know what brought out this derogatory term to call me darky. We don't even know to this day why he began to weep. We just know when we came back.
We intentionally then, every time we came back into this area, every couple of years we'd come back, we actually intentionally called them up to see about staying at their home. I felt like the Lord wanted us to do that. I felt like they needed to see. Obviously, he came from a racist background and history and whatever, and so that came out. But I just felt like God wanted us to do that. So we actually would stay at their home, believe it or not. We would stay at their home, and we would stay for a week or so when we go visit other families in the area. And then we eventually had kids, and so I remember very clearly our girls getting up in the old man's lap, sitting on the couch, and he would read Bible stories to our kids. for the next good number of years, I don't know how many years that he lived, never, ever was there ever another comment that ever insinuated anything else. I tell you what, when he was saying those things about my wife, I mean, I just felt like attacking him. I felt like hitting him back. I felt like, what? Calling him names back. What? You don't even know her. Why are you saying these types of things? It just seemed crazy to me. But obviously there was hurt. There was something going on that was under it. And God taught me a really important lesson that day. And it kind of reinforced it as time went on with that family. And that those moments, those times when you feel like when someone strikes out at you, says something that's harsh, that's negative, whatever the motivation, if it could be a racial motivation, it could be whatever the motivation, anger, that's not caused by you. You didn't cause it. But God showed me that you don't treat people in kind to how they treat back.
We all have those areas in our life that we would probably be ashamed of if we were to go back and to look at them. But that's what's so amazing about God's grace and his forgiveness.
God is going to be able to do the work, to be able to minister in their heart, to bring about whatever change it is. Yet it may not happen as quick as it did in this situation, but God showed me he was able to do the work that he needed to do because I didn't respond in the way that I felt like responding. And my wife too, because of she could have easily gotten mad, angry, and responded in a way that would have been unkind back to him. Mm-hmm. But I think it's because God allowed us to respond kindly back and showed that we weren't afraid to associate with them and identify with them, that I think disarmed him in that process.
That story is so inspiring. Mostly, Bob, because I don't think I could have reacted the way that they did.
Oh, I know I couldn't.
How hard that would be. I mean, when I feel attacked, usually I kind of attack back. And I feel like at least I would have yelled at them for their ignorance, stormed out of the room, been really dramatic about it, and slammed the door on that toxic relationship forever. And I think that would have been natural if they had done that, totally justified. But thankfully, we have a God who does believe in justice, and there is a time for that, a judgment for bad actions. But first, God offers us mercy and redemption. First, God pays back hate with love. Again, he did it and does it for us every day. And I'm amazed and inspired that Lorna especially, but Dirk too, that they were able to be God's mercy and love first. And because of that, we did see redemption in that story. If they hadn't, at least as far as I'm concerned, it seems obvious that that man almost surely would have kept on hating and degrading people of color the rest of his life, and nothing would have changed. Same world, responding in kind, anger for hate, hate for hate. But Lorna and Dirk did see through God's eyes that the only way to change a heart is to love first, to forgive first, to offer redemption. That responding in kind, God style, is responding in kindness to show the stronger alternative to hate. And it's not like Lorna and Dirk cowered away. They still stood up for themselves and against racism.
Right.
We never back down or water that down. But showing love is never watering down. Love is strength. Love is what breaks hate. God-sized love. So, Bob, I do have a question for you, though.
All right.
Totally cool if you don't want to answer, since I did not warn you ahead of time with this, and then we'll just cut this part out. But you are also in an interracial marriage.
Yes.
So do you have any stories of bigotry that you two have encountered either way, and how you reacted when that happened?
Not a whole lot. My wife, Leah, is Chinese, or what she calls American-born Chinese. Mm. What's funny is I did not grow up around any Asians. The first Asians I met was when I was in college. Mm. and then I married one. For you to understand this, I am a pasty white redhead, and both of her parents emigrated to the U.S. And when we got engaged, Leah's mom cried when she found out Leah was marrying a white guy, because for her, it wasn't just an issue of the fact that she would marry Chinese. She wanted her daughter to marry a Chinese person from the right province. And there's no one in Chinese. No, I am not from that.
What redheaded province is that?
There's not tons of redheaded Chinese people running around. As one friend joked, you couldn't even find yourself a plain one. And then my dad had trouble with it. But it's also important to note that because we lived far away from our parents when we met, and we got engaged without either one of us meeting the other person's family.
Nah.
And so once Leah met my dad, everything was cool. He respected her. He loved her.
There's power when you actually get to know a human.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And with my mother-in-law, we went up there after we got engaged. I met her. Everything was cool.
That's cool.
So have we been on the receiving end of racism? Yeah. But honestly, it's nothing compared to what so many people have gone through.
Right.
That's why I loved when Dirk pointed to it as a spiritual issue. Yeah. He said, when we begin to pigeonhole and we begin to look down and make generalizations and judgments about people because they may be different than us, we're actually making a judgment against the Creator himself.
Yeah.
Racism, bigotry, it's all a spiritual problem. When we take our eyes off God, our vision becomes corrupted. And you know what? We all do it. In one way or another, we'll find something that divides us from other people and use that to look down on them. Now, I'm from a part of Maryland that is really kind of southern.
Yeah.
And there was a lady who moved from the West Coast to my hometown. I met her and we were talking, and she said, I like the people on the West Coast because they're so open-minded. And the only people we don't like are people from the South who are so prejudiced.
She didn't catch the irony there at all.
Not at all. The
open-mindedness.
Yeah, so it's like a little blind to our own prejudices, are we? Funny thing is, we became really good friends after that. But at first I was offended.
Right.
And then I realized I've got my own blind spots too.
Right. We all have the blind spots.
We all have the blind spots. We may not be aware of it, but we all have our prejudices in one form or another. And that's what our next guest, Gwen Smith, is going to talk about.
I think many of us are in denial about our prejudice just because of a lot of fears that they have. And that's including myself, especially today with seeing a lot of the injustices that we believe are injustice, unnecessary killings of Black men, and being a mom of 2 Black boys. And of course, that would kind of, cause some anger because you feel like, well, that's wrong. And so with that, then, I become, then my own prejudices start, coming out because I'm angry and I want to lump all white people, into the same category. And when I have those issues arise in my own life, is I have to get to a point to where I just have to take it all to the cross, which is where we all need to be, because it's a spiritual issue. And I think when people really start going before the Lord and saying, Lord, really show me what's in my heart, seeing what prejudices they have there. And when the enemy bring those thoughts to our mind, because it's the enemy that wants to keep us separated and divided, take those thoughts captive, give them to the Lord. And sometimes we have to ask, Lord, where did that come from? Why did I think that? Why do I feel this way? And I think the Lord will answer that. One of the prayers that I've been praying is, because of a lot of this going on, I keep going before the Lord, just asking him to help my heart. Lord, help heal my heart, because I can't do it. I see the anger. I see the bitterness. I see the bad stuff come out when things happen or things are said. And I think if we all can get to that point to where we tell the Lord, Lord, I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to think like this. And to help me to remove that with other people who are not like us, who don't look like us, who don't talk like us, because we are one in Christ. No matter what our color is, no matter what our economic status is, we have to start seeing ourselves as citizens of heaven. And when we start seeing ourselves as citizens of heaven, then we'll start seeing people as one. Because once we get to heaven, Revelations talk about it's going to be all tribes, tongues, everything up there. And some kind of way we're going to have to get along up there. And what is a better place to get practice is down here. And God, reminds me of his love and grace. And that's how I'm to love them, and allowing him to work through us so that we can show more love to one another.
We need to take it to the cross. That's perfect advice. We need to do that to address our own sin, our own prejudices, and we need to do that to gain the strength and wisdom to stand for those who are suffering from someone else's prejudice.
Yeah.
Now, to be a bit vulnerable here, this is not an easy topic for me to cover. In so many ways, I'm not qualified to talk about it. And yet, this is a topic Matt and I feel God wanted us to present today. Having said that, my wife, Leah, has taught me a lot about what it's like to be on the other side of the racial divide. But at no time do I feel qualified to speak on the subject. And that's why it's so great to hear from people who have been through it, people who have lived it. I've learned a lot. And what did I learn? Well, George could have given up.
Right.
He could have given into hatred and no one would blame him. Instead, he chose to stand up for what was right. He chose to fight it and in the process gain the respect of many. Dirk and Lorna had two great reactions. First, kudos to Lorna for not strangling that guy right then and there. And Dirk gently showed the man that his racism was a spiritual issue. He let God speak into that situation, and that resulted in a transformation of the man's heart. And finally, Gwen is so wise in telling us to take it to the cross, because our prejudices can be rooted so deeply that we're not even aware of them.
Yeah, I love when Gwen said that we all need to check our own heart, that our own heart is where it begins. None of us are perfect. We all make poor judgment calls that creep into stereotyping, bias, maybe prejudice, or worse from time to time. And instead of sweeping it under the rug and pretending it isn't there, that is when we need to take it straight to God. Confess it. Let him squash that cockroach thought or action in you and ask him to help you see people how he sees people, as one body with many parts, cultures, race, abilities. God made them all in his glory and all reflect a part of who God is, to work together where God's spirit of love resides. That is what God calls us to be. What Jesus' final prayer was on the night he knew he would die on the cross for our sins. His prayer was that we all be one, just as he is one with the Father. Jesus' literal and lasting desire for us is to have complete unity, where the Bible says love does not harm their neighbor, but instead that we love others as we love our own bodies, as one human race. And only then will we have a chance to squash this horrible thing called racism from our world. So that ends our episode on how we as Christians can deal with racism when we see it. It's our prayer that the stories you heard today inspire you to check your own heart and see what you can do in your circle of influence to eradicate racism and prejudice wherever you see it.
Our hope with 78.4 is that it'll help you flourish in your relationship with Jesus. That's why we include the links to articles and tools in our show notes as a way of helping you grow in Him and build toward your own legacy. So please check out our show notes. Also, please email us because we'd love to get to know you.
Yeah, and the audio you heard today comes from some of the more than 600 and counting videos on our website, legacy.cru.org. That's legacy.cru.org. We also have a YouTube channel, Cru Legacy, and a Facebook page. Please check it out. And if you like today's podcast, we ask that you please subscribe so you can get the next week's season finale.
Season finale.
That's right. Next week, we will wrap up season 3, so you won't want to miss that. Also, please rate us. It helps others hear about our podcast.
784 is a podcast of Legacy, a project of Cru.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. And while we're away, we want to encourage you to remember that whatever God did in the lives of the people you heard speak today, He can do in you. So until we're together again, go out there and continue the legacy.